I want to say welcome to everybody. It just so happens that this first Google Hangout of the course coincides with the Social Psychology Day of Compassion. And
Oh,
it turned out
wonderful.
that one person in our class decided as an act of compassion that he was going to release his slot, at least an act of generosity, to have somebody else be able to participate. So that is in full swing. And
That's
I also
lovely.
want to say how much I appreciate the generosity of everybody here, sometimes in the middle of the night, wherever you are, to join us and spend some precious time. I want to, of course, welcome our guest of honor, Professor Philip Zimbardo, who, as some of you know, has served as my doctoral advisor 30 years ago at Stanford, and has been a very close friend, a mentor, and inspiration ever since, as he is to so many people in the field. He also serves on the Social Psychology Network Advisory Board, so he's had a hand in shaping that as well, and of course the Stanford Prison Experiment website. I'm not going to go into great detail about him, but I do want to say a few things. He has served in many leadership capacities in the field. He was elected president of the American Psychological Association, no small feat, given that there's about 150,000 members. He was twice elected as president of the Western Psychological Association, and he served in other capacities as well. He has been the host of his wildly popular PBS series, Discovering Psychology. He has been author and co-author of the longest continuously published introductory psychology book in the history of the field, Psychology and Life. His book, The Lucifer Effect, is a New York Times bestseller, and if I were to spend time going through all of the awards and accolades,
No,
we would have no time for
no.
a hangout. So I just want to say thank you very much to Professor Zimbardo for taking time to talk with us. There you go. And what I've done is to ask him to just spend the briefest, a minute or two to tell us a little bit about what the work is that he's currently engaged in, and then we can open it up for introductions. I hope that you'll say a word of introduction, each of you, about not only your name and your country, but perhaps your work or what it is that you do. And then we can just have a free discussion about anything that's on your mind. So
Great.
with that, Professor Zimbardo.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for making this available. I'm honored to be here. I've been teaching for 55 years, and so very little is new to me, except this is totally new. Um, and it's really inspirational. There's been a lot of criticism of online courses. They usually start off big and then students vanish. And my prediction was, if an online course is ever going to work, it's going to be the one taught by Scott Plous, because he's going to put in the time and effort and has the technological help to make it work. And so this is one wonderful example where, I'm talking to students in 5 countries around the world, and obviously it could be even more. I started a group in San Francisco called the Heroic Imagination Project. The acronym is HIP, and we have a wonderful website I'd love you to visit. I guess Scott will put it up, heroicimagination.org. And so our focus is, how do we inspire and train ordinary people to be prepared to act heroically when a challenging situation arises? How do you get everyone to think of themselves as heroes in training? What is it that you can do each day, little things, rather than wait for disasters or emergencies, that create the foundation of heroism, which is really to be socio-centric. Heroes care about other people. Heroes notice that other people need help. And heroes somehow have the moral courage to come to the aid of other people. So this is what I'm doing now. We have an educational program. A lot of that is on the web. We are trying to get money to encourage people to do research on heroism. As I said, there's almost no research on heroism. And then mainly we want to develop public engagement. Things like getting young people to be responsible for the health of their family. And we're going to call those health heroes. Getting your family to diet regularly, stop smoking, exercise, follow medical regimens, and young people should be eco-heroes. That, our nations are destroying the environment by not recognizing the disaster of climate change. I call that evil of inaction. And so young people have to begin to do things to begin to change that, to stop littering, have program cleaning up the environment, and again, putting pressure on their governments to take action. So these are just some of the ideas that I'm doing in my new life. No more evil, no more violence, no more prisons. Mostly good deeds.
Great.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. It gives us a lot to discuss, obviously. Why don't we do a very quick round of introductions,
Sure.
and then we can open up for questions.
Sure.
I'm Marwa from Egypt. I'm studying medicine in my first year.
I'm calling from Denmark. This is first on the list, alphabetically speaking.
Right. Where in Denmark?
What's your name and what you do?
My name is Natalia Hoffman. I study cognitive semiotics at the university here, and I'm doing my final year now, and I'm writing my master thesis.
Srinivasan, I'm a freelance graphic designer.
Hi, I'm Mohit. I'm from Bangalore, India. Currently, I'm working with Texas Instruments as an engineer.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a trainee counsellor, and I'm also studying for an MPhil in English literature.
Hi everyone, good morning. Here in Manila, I am Susie, I am 21, and I am a graduate of psychology in Ateneo de Manila University. Right now, I'm an HR practitioner for Accenture here in the Philippines. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Terrific. Great.
Okay, we're all on board.
So let's open it up for anything that's on your mind. It could be about the Stanford Prison Experiment. It could be about the Heroic Imagination Project, or anything really about psychology, social psychology. Dr. Zimbardo, the floor is yours.
Hi, this is Susie from the Philippines.
Okay, hi Susie.
Can you give us that one incident or encounter which pushed you or inspired you really to pursue psychology?
Why did I become a psychologist?
Yes.
It wasn't quite clear. What pushed me to become a psychologist?
Yes.
Okay. I was a child psychologist, meaning I was interested in psychological issues when I was very young. By that I mean, as a child, I grew up in New York City, although now I live in San Francisco. And in New York City, my family was in poverty. My family is Sicilian, Sicilian background, and we lived in poverty, which meant we lived in an inner city ghetto. And if you live in an inner city ghetto, as all of you know, or any place around the world, you are surrounded by evil, meaning there are men whose job it is, who make a living corrupting good kids, to get them to steal, to get them to sell drugs, and to get the women to sell their bodies, and other things. And some of my friends actually got tempted and did bad things. Some of them even went to jail, and some didn't, like me. And I, as a child, I always wondered, why did some people give in to temptation and do bad things just for money, and others of us were able to resist? So essentially, it's profound. Now I realize later it was a profound psychological question, but I was just curious. And in a way, the theme of the Lucifer Effect is, how do we understand how good people do bad things? And so, but even then, when I was trying to think about, was it something about the people? There's some defect in them. And I think even as a child, I began to think, no, it must be something about the differences in their family life. I realized having a father made a huge difference. Typically, the kids who ended up doing bad things often had no father at all, or the father was always absent, or the father was abusing the mother or abusing them. So in a funny way, even as a child, I began to be a situationist. I began to try to understand individual behavior in a social context, which then I have been doing all my life as a social psychologist.
Dr. Zimbardo?
Yes.
A short while ago, the Imagination Project website, and I was really impressed with the goals and objectives of that project.
Thank you.
And I was wondering if the coaching, the training that is offered on the website, could it be the in context?
Could it be in a cultural context? If I'm understanding you, that you've gone to the website, you find what we're doing interesting, and we're trying to put more information on the website. Of course, the foundation of everything we do in social psychology is
Okay.
it must be sensitive to cultural, national differences. So, but also in this case, it has to be sensitive to political realities. That is, to stand up, speak out, take action against injustice will get you in prison or get you killed in many countries. Uh, so, so, so essentially, we promote how to be a wise and effective hero, so that it's not simply you go in the street to challenge the political party in your country if you live in Iran or other places, or even in China, because you'll be labeled a dissident and essentially could be sent to jail. But there are other ways to be heroic in your family, in your school, in your community, which are not what I call the big heroes, challenging, immorality, challenging political corruption. So that's what we're trying to promote, to get people, young people of all ages, to think of themselves as having an inner hero that we would like to help you express by making you aware of the social psychological dynamics which promote evil, and how do we transform them into social psychological dynamics that promote good and compassion in the world.
I wonder if we could connect that question with Marwa and Egypt and a lot of the turmoil and challenges that are happening in Egypt. Marwa, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think people are trying to be act in heroic way these days, but it's there are a lot of obstacles in our ways that we need heroic people to stand for it. I want to ask something about the prison experiment, the Stanford prison experiment. Does concerning the situational factor that made some guards react sadistic and humiliating the prisoners? Is it just for the were in power they do so, or we can have an application on this as they behaved in an evil way because they were in authority, they have power to do this.
Right.
But can other people do the same thing? They can do harm to other people without having the power, or just the power make them do that?
Okay, that's a wonderful question. Let me just get back to the point that Scott raised. I mean, people around the world were so excited by the Arab Spring, and what was unique about it was young people acting in a network, in a hero network. So one of the things that I propose is to change the notion of hero away from the solitary, isolated individual. That's been our model throughout history. Agamemnon, Achilles, samurai warriors, and it's usually male killers, warriors. But in fact, most heroic action is always done better in a network. And typically, women are much better than men in forming such networks. In Poland, where I do a lot of work, when Jews were imprisoned in the Warsaw Ghetto, 400,000 Jews were put in this nightmare. It was a group of women who smuggled out 2,500 children, one or two a day, and they did it only because if you develop a network, you could move the children from house to house, family to family. So heroic networks, or we call them heroic squads, are what I want to promote. So what we saw, heroic networks developing in the Arab Spring of young people, and the key was the new technology, that you could send information because in the past, the government controlled all the information, and if you were rebellious, you were relatively isolated. So now you got young people acting with courage, but also with this new technology. But the point you raise is the study was really about how people adjust to being in totally different roles. I chose prison because prison is a metaphor of power, that prisons are all about guards having total power over prisoners who have none. Power, you know, the old saying is power corrupts. And so that's why you need systems around the individual to contain the excessive use of power.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Actually, I also have a question connected to a Stanford prison experiment, but I'll elaborate a little bit. So as far as I know, the objective to specify the factors that govern crowds or groups members' behavior gave rise to a number of theoretical explanations in the last, say, 100 of years. And there, as far as I know, there are four main theories, acclaimed theories. The one is the contagion theory by Le Bon. The other one would be the convergence theory. Then there's the individuation theory. And then there's the emergent norm theory, right. Which was, I think, yeah, 70s. Well, yeah, I'm interested in that stuff. So right. Basically, my question is about the emergent norm theory, and what do you think about it in connection with your experiment? Because I mean, as far as I could see, there were there's some application of that theory to your own experiment, because certain types of guards and prisoners could be distinguished in the course of this experiment.
Yes. Okay, let me just back up one step. When we try to understand, as your course is all about, the nature of human nature, almost all of psychology and almost people in almost every country believe in the power of the individual. So psychology, the definition is, it's the study of individual behavior and mental processes. But the word individual is prominent, okay? And when we try to say, well, how do we understand individual behavior, we start by saying we need to understand genetic makeup, what you inherit from the past, yes. And then we need to understand your personality, or we call it your disposition. And most analysis in psychology stop there, to say it is enough for us to study what you bring into the world and how you get shaped by the world that forms your personality. Social psychologists like Scott Plous and myself and Stanley Milgram and others say, of course, we have to understand what a person brings into any situation, but it is equally important to understand what social situations, what contexts bring out of people, that each of us is an actor on a stage of life. And there is always an audience. There's often a stage manager. We're often in costume. We're often given a script. There are often roles and so forth. So the theater metaphor is really a good one here. And so to understand your performance, it's not enough for me to say, tell me about your personality. I have to know all those other things. Who is the audience? Do you have following a script? What is the role you're playing in this particular play? And that's where the situational analysis of behavior comes in. And that's really a unique contribution that social psychology has made. Even though we've been doing this for years, we have not been effective in changing the basic thinking of the average person about what influences human behavior. Yep. And so the research that I did and the research Stanley Milgram did are really powerful demonstrations. They're more demonstrations than traditional experiments to say, hey, notice how individuals who start off as good at one point in a very short time can be corrupted by situation. by group pressures, by rules, by roles, by norms, by being in having a costume, and so that's why the study is for us very, very important. But in that study, several things happen. It is de-individuation, and I did some before I did the prison study. I did research on de-individuation, simply showing that de-individuation can be a process that promotes evil, because it means if I am anonymous, if I think no one knows who I am and really no one cares, then I don't feel I have to follow social norms, social etiquette. I can do whatever I feel like, whatever I think I can get away with. In the prison study, simply putting people in different uniforms, the de-individuation thing is taking prisoners' names away and making them numbers. So you are no longer a name, you're just a number. And this is what happens in prison. But it is an emergent norm.
Hey, Professor Zimbardo, I had a question regarding this Stanford prison experiment only. So what we're trying to say there is that people behave differently in different situations. So maybe a good person can behave badly if given a situation, but that does not mean that it justifies that behavior, right?
No,
So,
no. No, it never justifies it. I mean, even if you say everybody in that situation did the bad thing, it's never to say, therefore, people are not responsible for their behavior. Ultimately, if you do something which is immoral, which is corrupt, which is illegal, even though you say the situation made me do it, you are still personally, legally responsible, and that I think is really important.
Professor Zimbardo,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a quick question with a follow-up question.
Sure.
So, how much of the Stanford prison experiment were you present for? Were you on site for? Did you see of the abuses?
Oh, I was there virtually. I was there all the time, except obviously I had to sleep. I lived in my office, which is on the second floor of the psychology department. I had a fold-out bed, so I would go out. Sometimes I would go out with a prison consultant for dinner, in the student cafeteria. But that week, I never left the broader premises. What happened, of course, is the worst abuses happened at the late night shift, and it was a sense in which the guards waited for me to go to sleep in order to do these abuses. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have enough money then to videotape all the time. In those days, videotaping was very expensive. You had 1-inch tape, physical tape, and that I think in the week we did it, we ended up with 12 hours of videotape, and so we had decided to videotape significant events, meals, visiting days, parole board hearings, things of this kind. But we didn't videotape all the time, because then I would have known what the guards were doing, because each morning I would check to see what the guards did on night shift. So it was, I would have loved to have videotaping now, given how inexpensive it is, and it's not a physical tape in a machine. If the study were done again, obviously you would have videotaping around the clock, and also you would then have an assistant whose job it is to look through catalog what was happening, and then where there was some immoral, unethical behavior, to alert me. The question 2.
I'd like to ask you a question, a tough question that a number of students have identified. So, in the Quiet Rage, alongside the situational dynamics, you emphasise the role of the priest and the lawyer and the parents in continuing to allow the abuses to happen.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, years later, with this distance, has the amount of personal responsibility you take for what happened changed?
Great question.
Yeah. No, in the Lucifer Effect book, I have a whole chapter where I make explicit my responsibility. I was the system. I created it, I maintained it, and I had the power to end it. So I am ultimately responsible for everything that happened there. There's no question about that. And I still feel guilty for the suffering that the prisoners that the prisoners experience.
I'd like to follow up on Tom's question, which I find a very interesting one. So you have a kind of aerial perspective that time has afforded. And the focus has always been on the suffering of the prisoners. But I wonder in hindsight if you feel that there was greater suffering from the people who participated as guards. Because the prisoners went through their ordeal for a few days, that was it. The guards live with the knowledge that they could behave in a sadistic way. They learn things about themselves that they may not have known or wanted to know. And so I wonder, looking back on it, if it's your sense that it's the guards who actually suffered more than the prisoners or others, or was it really the prisoners that had the greatest degree of suffering?
No, that's a great question, and it's hard to know. Okay, let me put it differently. We had a full day almost of debriefing. See, when you do a study that involves deception of any kind, or any study, you're really, as an experiment, obligated to tell the participants what you are finding. And so you want to validate their experience. In the prison study, given that there was so much turmoil, chaos, suffering, we first met with all the prisoners. And then we met with all the guards separately while the prisoners got the uniforms, got their salary. And then we brought them all together. And I began by saying, we have all done bad things. Some of you have done very bad things, almost sadistic things. Others of you who were good guards never once stopped the bad guards. So that means you're part of that group. And the point, stop them, meaning you never said, hey, you don't have to do this. Why are you going overboard? So I said,
is it your sense that then the insights that they had, where they're reflecting on their behavior, that they suffered as much or more as the prisoners, or would you say not so much?
Oh, I would think some of them did. I mean, the point is that they knew they didn't have to do it. So for the prisoners, really, it's much more anger. I mean, they were being treated unfairly, unjustly. A guard who went beyond the role. See, every role has boundaries, okay? So that you can fulfill your role within boundaries. The guards who did the really bad things, I call them doing creative evil. It's really going beyond the boundary, the limit of your role. And so that the point is, you didn't have to do that. You didn't. Your role is get the prisoner to do push-ups as punishment. You didn't have to have another prisoner step on their back while they did it. Okay? You didn't have to have a prisoner spit in another prisoner's face. So that it's in retrospect, it's knowing that you could have done your job well as a guard and not exceeded the essential limits of your role. And I would think that that's where the guilt comes in. But see, the other thing that's unique about the study that somehow, see, in the Milgram study and almost all psychology, an experiment lasts 1 hour, maybe 50 minutes. This is almost a week. Prisoners live there. It becomes their life, day and night. Guards live there 8 hours. Go home, go to life, come back, and relive this experience day after day. So essentially, it's really the socialization into these roles over time that you never ever see in an ordinary experiment because it's too short. You're playing a role. In the Milgram study, you're a teacher, a learner. You know, maybe it's a half an hour, the whole thing. So in the Milgram study, you know, you're doing bad things, but at the end they tell you the guy was a Confederate, he didn't really get hurt. Some people still felt guilty, but it was a much more containable experience than if you're guard or prison in the prison study.
And Natalia, you had a question or a follow-up?
Yes, thank you very much.
Maybe we'll make that the last question then.
Yeah.
All right. So you emphasize the role of situational factors as well as confinement, both in the Stanford prison experiment and in Abu Ghraib. how important the situation and the confinement were. So now I wonder whether you think that the individuation could take place in the open air, outside, on the streets.
De-individuation?
Yes.
Oh, sure. I mean, it happens every time somebody is doing a service for you and you treat them like a servant. It happens every time you're a student and you live in a dormitory and somebody feeds you and you never know to ask their name, you never look them in the eye, you never give them a compliment, you treat them as if they are a servant. So we all do that. We take away, that is, there are people who perform many functions for us and that we do not recognize their individuality. So de-individuation simply means it's a psychological process by which you minimize or remove someone else's individuality, uniqueness. And so now I'm promoting the opposite of that, to say, to be a hero in training, your task this week, each day, is to make someone else feel special and respected. One way to do that is give them a compliment. Okay. One way to do that is learn their name and use their name. One way to do that is look in their eye and say something that will make them feel good about themselves. Okay. It's hard to do because we don't practice. I'm saying compliment giving, I want that to be a habit, but it's really part of heroic training because it means I have to focus on other people. So when I go into a situation, instead of saying, I hope people will like me, I go into a situation and say, who is it there that I could like? Who is it there I can make feel better, feel good?
And what a perfect way to end on the day of compassion.
Right.
Thank you.
It fits beautifully. I just want to thank everybody who's been involved in this. It's a privilege to participate in this with you. And what I'll do is plan to edit down and post so that other members of our class can share in the session.